So it's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome you to the last in the fall series of WING webinars, and this time with someone who is relatively new, I think, to the fielding community. One of the pleasures for me of doing this webinar series and of WING in general is that we've been able to expand the fielding network to include people new to our community. And one such person is Melanie, who I can actually see your eyes now, Melanie.
Wow, it's working. Hi.
It's working. Terrific. Melanie was introduced to me through my colleague, our colleague, James Kiriakou of ISI. And so I'm so looking forward this afternoon to your presentation and to learning more about empowerment works and about you and about your topic, which is a woman's worth pioneering whole systems collaboration for the new economy. So I am going to pass the presenter role to you and then ask you, once I do that, to share your desktop so that we can see your PowerPoint. And I'm going to let you sort of loose on this group to use the time in whatever way you'd like. Okay?
Fantastic.
And are we now recording?
We are.
Okay, terrific.
Great. And my desktop is shared. And can everyone see? Here we go.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's joining and who will be joining the recordings. It's just a total honor to be invited to be part of this fielding program and to get to learn about the Worldwide Network for Gender Empowerment. I have just returned from 3 months in Europe where I was putting on the 3rd biennial edition of the Global Summit, which is really about taking whole system collaboration to scale. And so I just thought coming back here at this time would be a perfect opportunity to share the big picture and look at what's going on in the world, what's emerging, some of the trends that I'm seeing around the world, and how we in this worldwide network of women and people standing for gender empowerment can really bring these big ideas into the forefront and imagine this new future and really take it to scale, take it to the next level with the economic shift that's happening. So I'd like to just start out with big picture overview. We'll be covering a few of the innovations that have been part of my world and my life and my dreams for the past 12 years, and starting out with just a brief review of Empowerment Works, which has been an innovation vehicle that started in Santa Barbara in 2001. And that vehicle was actually inspired by getting to know indigenous communities in West Africa. It was really seeing, wow, you know, there's these incredible communities that have held on to their indigenous cultures, and they have such a richness. I was studying sustainable development at the Monterey Institute and looking at the global policy system, and my thesis was questioning, you know, what is it? Is it poverty that drives high fertility rates, or is it the other way around? And so just really looking at what the, you know, what's the root cause of behaviors that lead to large families, and what really drives people. And that class took me to West Africa, and I really saw people living in community and how they were creating their own security, and discovered some things that basically shaped my entire career and future. So in the West African rainforest, I was seeing that local indigenous people had an incredible amount of knowledge around making textiles, around medicinal plants in their communities, and seeing globalization coming in, and also a bit of a top-down kind of isolated development paradigm that was still in effect. You know, really giving a message to people that they didn't have enough, and actually driving a lot of the assets that they did have kind of underground I was really saddened and started advocating, and Empowerment Works became a vehicle for promoting an asset-based approach to community development, which we call 7 stages to sustainability. And we'll touch on that a little bit. So, yeah, just since 2001, we started in Africa working with local social entrepreneurs. Those programs spread to Latin America, and ultimately we turned it into a curriculum which launched with the World Academy for the Future of Women, and that wove in between the production of the Global Summit, which we'll get into a little bit later. And the big vision and mission of Empowerment Works is just seeing, we really need whole system solutions if we're going to have lasting solutions. So with the term sustainable, just wanted to take a moment and really check in with that word. What does that mean to you? We're talking about social, environmental, economic, with the philosophy that when you bring it together, there's an interdependent strength that comes to being. And we live in a whole system. It's all interdependent. That's what I feel sustainability is. And in our terminology, interdisciplinary, multi-sector, what is that? What does it mean to be a whole system? So multi-sector, here we've broken it down with voluntary groups, citizens, civil society. That happens to be a huge, huge amount of our population. The private sector, these are all the businesses. And then there's government, which is having a huge influence, but it's a small percentage. So, how do we bring these vehicles for change together? Where do we see ourselves in them? And looking at that is also another part of our model for creating a more whole system approach to global change. Here we have some of you, especially if you're in Santa Barbara, you might be familiar with the work of Barbara Marx Hubbard. And it's really interesting after, at least 40 years of her being an activist around multi-sector, whole system policy and change, she's really getting recognized and getting well known around the world at the age of 82 with Birth 2012 movement. So that's her graphic there, the wheel of co-creation. And by the way, Buckminster Fuller acknowledged her as being the most well-informed person about the future. So pretty great to know her. So where are we, humanity, going? And how do we get there? It takes big vision, lots of little steps. Maybe if we shoot for the stars, we'll land on the moon and actually have a world that we can live in. So here we've got just a representation of people in China when they had their full rivers, and down here is just a little graphic of Empowerment Works strategy with getting the 7 stages out to the world and putting it into a format online that people can work together in and facilitate collaboration from the ground up. And now I just want to, check in. I'm guessing that a lot of you found out about this webinar through fielding, and I'm really quite happy to hear that you've got Ken Wilber in your history. So yeah, just looking at his work, I've learned about Schumacher, whose Small is Beautiful book back in the 50s and 60s is now coming full circle and getting to be well known. Vegetarian diet nowadays is getting to be well known. In the 80s, that was like a complete strange thing to do. Now it's getting to be understood as the one way to address climate change. And this is looking at also, back to our food system. 10,000 years ago, what we call as prehistory, that was basically the way the world evolved. This is, the last million years, depending on what you believe, that's how humanity came into being. And we were whole system thinkers. We lived in communities of 300 people and clans. There were matriarchal societies. And then what happened? We started becoming mechanized. We moved into linear thinking, into patriarchs, into monotheism from polytheism. Another thing that I witnessed in the rainforest culture of Western Senegal was, people were really holding on to their forest culture. And when we move away from our forest culture, we lose connection with nature and how it sustains us. It's just shifting full circle. So, many of you might be aware that we've hit over 7 billion people on the planet. And in 1962, we only had 3 billion. So, we look at these trends of growth and maybe this manifest destiny of taking over the world and, kind of settling in and living a certain quality of life made sense with 3 billion people. But what does 7 billion mean? So now it seems like we're tapping into this deeper evolutionary, the way we evolve thinking, which is that we've got to get back to nature if we're going to continue to survive on the planet. So we have the slow growth conferences. We have Post Growth Institute in Australia. And, there's a lot of movements popping up around the world that are saying we've got to shift back and, we've got the happiness index getting beyond GDP. So these are just a few of the trends. And I just wanted to acknowledge Polly Higgins, who's just quintessential eco-feminist and just a total goddess. She is a big hero of mine. She was a corporate attorney in the UK, and she had an epiphany and was looking at, how do we get Ecocide back on the agenda. And, so she's been leading a campaign to make it the 5th crime against peace. And in her group's research, Eradicate Ecocide, they found that in 1996, and by the way, today is UN Day, it's also Global Oneness Day, and she found in her research that Ecocide was almost going to be the 5th crime against peace in 1996 at the United Nations, and it was actually voted to be dismissed or to be buried by 4 major leaders in the UN, the US, China, France, and the UK. And so it's pretty amazing to consider where the world would be. So it's all coming back. So this is just as far as having frameworks to bring about this eco-feminist, local asset-based kind of permaculture model to redevelop a civilization that honors and protects local culture. This is a framework that I identified in 2000, 2001, and based empowerment works on. But since 2001, it's been really incredible to find out that there's many other groups around the world that have also identified this framework. There's a group in Brazil that rehabilitates favelas with an almost identical roadmap. And I also learned that a innovation researcher named Alt Schuler out of Russia, who analyzed 100,000 patents or something, some huge number, identified the same pattern as the way that humans innovate. And so our philosophy is that it's a bit of the 100th monkey. So essentially, what we're advocating as a roadmap for locally led sustainable development is, that we actually start from the ground up rather than coming in with what a global or regional or national policymaker would want to do, or an NGO. We ask the local community members, what is really driving them, what are the critical issues that need to be addressed, and that's what sets the context. From there, we engage partners. Those partners assess their own local assets that can be developed into sustainable economic opportunities. Together, the local partners create a plan. And then from there, you have a basic context to build upon and build that local capacity, and then to equitably exchange. So identifying, products and services that value and protect local heritage. And once those products are sustainable, find ways of giving back and reinforcing those local assets so the cycle can begin again. And all of these are available on empowermentworks.org. And this framework is a way to really look into the local community, but also into the global community, and just to question, what are the real, if we look at ourselves as an ecosystem, what is the value that each of these sectors brings to the table? As a professional, do you see yourself as a sustainable business, as a media group, as an artist in action, as a public benefit organization, which, by the way, could also be a public service agency? And it's really about identifying our own puzzle piece. I'm sure many of you that are interested in this, you might be, I know for myself, I tend to think really big and not know where to start. And so this is a way that we can really identify, what is our own asset, whether it's a sector or whether it's you on a team. Are you a supporter? Are you somebody who's really good at organizing others? Are you a detail person? Are you an idea person? And really being honest about that. And this is bringing those pieces together, the 7-stage framework and the 6 sectors. And this is, I understand this is a lot to maybe digest right away, but this is the big, big vision of imagine, and that's what we're doing. We're imagining really big here, a world and a new kind of a development system that didn't segment sustainable development for something that a small fraction of development workers did, or what governments or the United Nations did, but rather something that all of society were engaged in, and more the way that we look at our global economic system. So the big idea, I would say, is stepping away from it being isolated and to some, realization that if we're really going to resolve poverty and create a sustainable future, it actually needs to be the way the whole economic system is working. And this is one vision for how that process can function with this sustainable development model. So over on the left, you have the local communities building their own teams, engaging their own partners, doing their own local asset assessment, like asset mapping, creating their own plans. And then whatever the vehicle that they do that in, whether it's marketing directly or through a web portal, which we'll get to, there's a realization and a focus on building their own skills and the human capacity in order to build upon the local assets. And as we do that, then we reach out to whether it's local partners in empowerment or regional or global in order to build skills, transfer technologies, access markets, media, marketing, and expand whatever it is, whether it's information or markets, their reach, and then through that success, reinvest in the local businesses. There's Kiva, which is an example of how this might work. And they reinforce the impact and then continue, so that we're really talking about an exit strategy for poverty here. Instead of creating an economic system around development, we want to create an economic system out of sustainable livelihoods. That's not necessarily nonprofit, but more in the private sector, and one that rewards social impact. And this is another lens into this, going a little bit deeper and just looking at how we can scale this. So for myself as a social entrepreneur, I see a lot of these innovations as interconnected, and I'm also really excited to work on OnePie Collaboration Portal as a social enterprise that can work with businesses, and this is actually an upcoming initiative that's in the works. And this is some more detail around how you can look at it as one website system, which is what's being presented here, but it's also looking at the internet and all of the different innovations that are happening, all the different websites that have been launched and created that are essentially making, what is it? Root Capital is a social investment fund that supports, local cooperatives and creates access to capital for women's groups making fabrics and textiles and increasing their access to market. There's World of Good. There's a lot coming up on the internet that is just making grassroots sustainable development a lot easier, and making it a lot easier for independent stay-at-home moms. So these are all trends that are bringing us together in the global economy. And one, as I mentioned in the beginning, the Global Summit has been this big vision that I've been stewarding, and now very happy to be in the next phase of passing it on globally. We had the first two in San Francisco, and we had the third just this summer in London, right after the Olympics. And what's relevant here as far as whole system solutions is that it's not just looking at a sustainable technology exhibit, or being a cultural festival, or just being a workshop, or having debates or speakers, but it's really saying, what if we have all of this under one roof? How can we create whole system leadership? And what if we have a global voting system where every single person in the world was listened to and actually had a voice at the table? So this is a long-term initiative that continues to grow. And this actually emerged having gone to the World Social Forum in 2007, and just seeing that there's this huge gap between the world social movement, economic movement, and environmental sustainability movements. And I'm sure many of you watched the news about what happened in Rio, and just, how cut off the grassroots movements were from being at the table. It was like all the policies had already been decided upon before the summit happened. And the basis of this is just how critical self-determination is, that we need our voices to be heard in order to be inspired, right? So going around the world, aligning with the Olympics is one strategy to really get all of humanity at the table. And for those of you who are curious about, the role of policy, I had the honor of spending a few days this last December with Maneka Gandhi. She's related to the former Prime Minister Gandhi, not Mahatma. But she was saying that like 90% of change comes from a policy level, and depending on the country, that can or cannot be driven by, you know, the extent that it's driven by local peoples, very high or low, but it's definitely important. And so this is a vision of a whole system policy making system for the 21st century. This is actually the way it is. And if we're looking at silos, you know, it's really easy for people to get into policy making, and they get into the trap of, you know, very well-funded lobbyists behind closed doors really driving the agenda. And it takes a lot more work for the citizens' voices to be heard, even though I think, you know, they have a greater voice per dollar, but it's really, really out of balance. And so this was actually drawn up by a graduate student at the Central European University in Budapest. And he wrote this, and then this was another vision from representative to partners in empowerment was my addition. But this is also imagine a new future. You know, if you believe we actually need to change our whole system, here's a vision for a new policy system where you have some kind of a guild system, which is also kind of an ancient way of managing societies and economies that are local asset-based, where you have the skills and, you know, the people who are really accountable to their markets and to the policies that are being set, being the ones at the table. So the idea here is to have, you know, people affected by health issues, women, you know, at the table, really, you know, people who are elected by those constituencies, you know, not just representatives, but actually people who are affected, the community members themselves involved in each stage of the policymaking cycle. And we also have the opportunity of cell phones. Right now we have people in Africa that are leapfrogging technology. One thing that we've done also to connect the local communities with the global movement of the Global Summit is we had local partners starting local summits. And in Kumasi last April, we had the first African Local Summit, and one of our partners, the Needs Report, actually did a text message-based voting system to pilot what it would look like for, you know, the African participants to vote on the policy issues that they wanted to see addressed at the next Global Summit. And that's exactly what we did. So this is also, yeah, just a representation, just a few bullet points of where the Global Summit event series is going. The African Local Summit 2013 is in the works. We have the Occupy Wall Street community that came to London, and they have a local summit underway in New York as a way to weave into this from civil society. And we have an Asian Regional Summit proposed in Pakistan, which is very exciting. And the idea here is it's really about sharing and exchanging local solutions. And this is where it all comes together. It's a network that we can see in our program ecosystem. And I guess at the end of the day, it's really a question of, you know, looking into our own networks and programs and the movements that we're involved in, and being vehicles for collaboration. Do we want a new economy? What does economy look like? I think a lot of academics and people who study economy wouldn't say that it's just money, but it's all of these things. It's the representation of resources. It's how we are moving through life. It's the positive and negative externalities of policymaking systems. So it's looking also at how we can find pattern languages, what are the values that are behind the patterns and the languages, and what do we, as a movement, what do we want to hold on to, and what do we want to advocate in the organizations and the communities that we're involved in a way that shapes our larger civil society movement to create that new economy. So I wasn't timing that, but I'd love to, open it back up to have a discussion about your thoughts of what's going on in the world right now and what it is being a woman leader for you.
Melanie, this is Anna, and I'm going to take the prerogative of the facilitator here. And first of all, thank you so much. I rarely hear such a comprehensive, the word comprehensive really applies to the way you both conceptualize, the way you've chosen to act, and also your presentation today. So thank you so much for that. And anybody who uses Venn diagrams as much as you do is always going to be near and dear to my heart, since I think it's to represent the world. I really want to go back to your representation. I'm going to ask people, by the way, if you're not going to make a comment, to please put yourself on mute. And if you are, please, of course, take yourself off mute. Your definition of sustainability, I thought, was really, really wonderful. I think it was on slide 4. And if you could go back to it, it was early on in your presentation. But I wanted to know, you've been so good at bringing together, you've been so good at bringing together a whole bunch of things from different people. Is this your conceptualization? Is it someone else's conceptualization? Or in any case, would you talk about it a little bit? Just because I think there are many people who are interested in sustainability but haven't pulled apart the terms in the way that you have here.
Yeah, so when you say this concept, what I've been sharing, and I'm really grateful for just to be able to have such a holistic platform, to be able to share these different innovations. The 7 stages to sustainability I identified after working with local social entrepreneurs in Senegal and Zimbabwe, and after designing the projects with them, and with the focus of stage 1 being about bringing together the local partners and empowerment, stage 2 identifying local assets that could be developed to create the abundance and the resources. So it's kind of bringing together what we now look at as social enterprise. This was just before people were talking about social enterprise. It was before Muhammad Yunus was, well known, or the Grameen banks. And so those 7 stages were kind of the unique, like, hey, this is a framework that could be the basis of an organization. So that was unique, and the way that the language advocates Indigenous culture was directly related to the experiences that I had in Africa and in the communities that I worked with and was inspired by, and their knowledge.
Let me interrupt you for a second then, and ask if I'm putting words in your mouth, given what you just said, to say that your models, most of your ways then at looking at these whole systems, has come out of your experience and your rather than any kind of academic inquiry. In other words, you've probably used the ideas that you've read about or learned about in your education, but the way you've pulled them together has come out of your on-the-ground experiences.
Absolutely, yeah, and not only the experiences which were related to the challenges. So it's a very permaculture, which I just am learning about. I went to at the same time my first permaculture conference. It was the North Coast Permaculture Convergence, about a week and a half ago, and they say, within the problem is the solution. And in Zimbabwe, you have hyperinflation, and it's just, the solution has to be at the ground level. The local communities have to find their own way of dealing with AIDS. They couldn't afford to import, AIDS therapies and medicine. So it was working, at the local level and just seeing, and also just naturally I was kind of obsessed with the lack of collaboration at the local level. And I think, one thing I didn't mention, but I find there's a solution in multi-sector and a tragedy in really that we tend to look to nonprofits to solve everything. And I think what that does is it creates a monoculture. So the bigger picture idea here, which a lot of people talk about, is, biomimicry. And so, yeah, it's kind of looking at people that I tend to resonate with or who share a philosophy, and then finding how their wisdom supports and reinforces things that I've experienced. So, yes, it's an ecosystem. And if you look at an ecosystem, the most fertility is at the edge of two ecosystems. And so if you can bring together a business and a nonprofit and a media group and an educational institution, that's where you're going to create this thriving solution. Just like sustainability, you need all the parts. So, yeah, so
that's terrific. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much in every practice. You pack a lot into every sentence, I have to say.
Sorry.
No. It's wonderfully rich. Let me not hog the space here and open it up to others who'd like to make a comment or ask a question.
Melanie, this is Kathy Tyner. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I would like to ask you to explain a little bit further. We have the slide up. We had the slide up of the sustainable. And I'm just would like for you to work that through with me a little bit, and I'm particularly curious about bearable. What fits into that category?
Well, this graphic I pulled from somewhere, and this can be found in many places, but this is, bearable is saying if it's only social and environmentally sustainable or healthy, then it's going to be just bearable. If you don't have any income generation, so social sustainability, what that relates to is like all voices being heard. It's, maybe the community itself, and actually, for example, parts of Africa, they're very economically challenged, but they're socially rich. So they'll have an incredible amount of culture and dance and process and, a feeling of belonging. That would be like socially healthy, right? And you could be socially healthy and you could have environmental abundance, but if there's not kind of an economic livelihood going on or other resources that are being exchanged, then that would be bearable for people. And then, these are all kind of mediocre terms, like equitable. Equitable is a very good thing. So it might be equitable for the time being. You can have equity, but if your environment isn't healthy, then it's going to run out. You can't have ongoing economic health without a sustainable, healthy environment. So it might be equitable, like, great, it's fair, but this is the whole thing that we're talking about in the economy right now. People talk about, well, we need jobs, we need to, focus on local energy so that people can get to work, right? So that's equitable right now. But it's not sustainable unless, we can have a healthy environment. If we have climate change, then what, right? It's like, it's only sustainable, it's only equitable as long as we have it available.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'll just offer the same, parallel for viable, which is it'll work, right? Like, it works if the environment's there and the economy is there. But if you have like an environmental dictatorship, with economic, resources, but people don't have a choice or a voice, then it might kind of suck for some people. Like, it'll work, but people aren't really going to be happy, and they might revolt on some level, and therefore it's also not sustainable.
Mhm.
Yeah, wow, thank you for that really clear explanation.
My pleasure.
I like that.
Thank you, and I'd love to know since we've got a small group here, where are you coming into this? And if everyone here could share, I'd love that. I'd be really grateful to hear about you and how you came to this.
Well, I am a faculty for the School of Educational Leadership and Change, and I've been following the work of WING for some time now. I've had the opportunity to participate in many of the activities. As a woman, I certainly appreciate all of the efforts. And so I guess I just continue to, be here to grow and learn and be inspired by people like you and the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kathy. Great work.
I can say
Thank
more
you.
about you, but in the interest of time, I won't comment on each person attending today.
This is Margot. Oh.
Yeah, Margot, welcome.
Hi. May I ask a question?
Sure.
And I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the presentation, but I'm wondering about, you talked about equity and you talked about business, media, community. I think you mentioned another body kind of partnership. I'm wondering about in this whole question of sustainability, how does one, and a project like yours or some other entity, how does one deal with the north-south inequalities, for example, and the various kind of macro and global forces that impact local decisions, local options, and so forth, right? So I'm thinking of, for example, Monsanto going into using GM products, chemicals, etc., right? So where does this idea of agency enter into such profound inequalities between North and South and within locations, between the elites and others?
I'm so glad. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you asked that, because I couldn't leave any of this out, because I think of it as a whole system. Maybe that didn't really, I didn't speak to that, and that was really the idea of the Global Summit, and also this idea of partners and empowerment, is that it's about setting a standard of what businesses need to be and holding them to account and getting the whole world together. I mean, this is extremely idealistic, but I think that this level of big idea, whether it's this framework or something like it, and also kind of the work of Polly Higgins, Monsanto, they're committing ecocide. And we as a global community need to stand together and say enough, slivering out, and, we're so fractured as civil society, and the world's social, economic, and environmental movements need to come together in order to overcome the vested interests of, I don't mean to be too much on a soapbox, it's just that the way that corporations are structured and the amount of resources that they have been able to amass and the system of vested interests around them takes a lot of organizing to overcome that. And that is actually what I'm advocating, and that we do it from the ground up. And so the vision of the Global Summit is that it's so large scale, and that one of the key tenets is to actually have every voice heard at the local level. So whether or not it has teeth or not, it's about having it be heard, so that the rest of the world, if you call yourself, for the social movements, can say, this is what the people around the world, and it could be, the seed movements, in India. Okay, we're talking about agricultural policy. Well, there were 4,000 indigenous or, seed farms put together by Vandana Shiva in India. Let's have those people at the table. Let's have the communities who are impacted, the suicide farmers. Like, having those people at the table is what we need to have as a standard in a new global policymaking system. And so your question is really kind of directly relates to this.
Yeah, may I was thinking of just one other thing, and then I'll shut up too.
Oh, no, please.
Is there a way in which people from the global north and the global south, people from both those locations, can actually think about a shared common destiny, so that it's not, it's not always the case that people from the north go to the south and quote, help out or organize or do movement building. But are there ways in which we in the north, particularly from, the U.S., who are so much involved in mess, how can we think about a shared destiny, and hence how would thinking about it that way shape our relationships in various of these projects, both there and quote here?
I think it's listening first. It's like creating that platform for those voices to be heard. And I love the way you asked that question of, can we have a shared destiny? And that's my dream, that we listen and honor and respect. And this is, that's the vision of the African Local Summit too. And then bringing those local summits together to form the body of the Global Summit. And that's really what, I think would be beautiful. So I think it's opening up that space instead of it being, the decisions being driven by those who have, or, if we want to call it the North. That's the way it's been for so long, isn't it? So it's going to take a big shift. Does anyone else have it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I wondered if anyone else would like to make a comment or ask a question.
Anna, can you hear me? This is Frances.
Yes, Frances, go ahead.
Hi, yes. The questions and answers have helped me kind of picture this in my mind a little better, and so I'm just wondering if you can tell me the kind of where the Global Summit is in its development, the way that you picture it developing.
I think it's in the, it's emerging towards, so I've put you on, opened up this slide about a 2020 vision where we might end up with the, in Dubai with the World Fair. It is in the process of, really establishing itself as a global forum that's not making anyone wrong, and, something that all people can see themselves be part of. And where I'm at, is having been, the lead producer and sort of visionary, is really looking for other organizations and networks to form a new governance system for it. That, for people who share this idea, like the woman earlier about a shared human destiny, and that this could be a forum for that, and where all voices are heard. So we had 3 summits so far. They've been held biennially every other year, 2008, 2010, 2012. And where it is right now is seeking council, both a council of trustees globally that can ensure that it's sustainable financially, and also the criteria and, a system of electing globally people to represent civil society, as well as people who are leaders across the 6 sectors and other disciplines, to make sure that it really represents a whole system, and also people from different language groups, people equally from the North and South, and just that it's really representing all of humanity. So it's a lot of work to be done. And it's looking for leaders and people with passion and energy from around the world to come and help realize its potential.
So I hope, Melanie, that you'll keep us posted about that so that we can participate as Wing and get the word out as Wing and see if our Wing members as well as our fielding community might well be interested in participating in a significant way. James,
I just wanted to make a general comment and observation here. I just thought it was very, very wise and very clever in a way how Melanie was able to take her knowledge of public administration to recognize the inherent limitations of the UN as a vehicle towards social justice, environmental sustainability, and economic security because of the policy cycles that all of these different governments have to go through individually before they can even get to the collective place that is the UN. And I think the Global Summit is a good example of a social innovation to try and take a global response to the limitations at the UN to try and go about achieving change from a different perspective and really take a macro approach to try and make change not only at the macro level but at the micro level. So I just wanted to applaud what's being done here.
Thanks, James. That's terrific.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. And remember, you might be on mute, so you may need to take yourself on mute. But we have time for one more question or comment.
Hi, Fariba.
Hi, Fariba. Did you have a comment, or did your microphone pick up a bit of ambient noise?
It really doesn't matter. I really want to thank you. It's I am enjoying the concept and how rich is the model. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for being such a good attendee at these webinars too. I really appreciate it. So I think
I am the benefactor, really. Thank you.
So I'm gonna close by saying.
Thank you, Fariba. And are we still on?
Melanie, you're still on. I think we may have lost Anna.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, yeah, thank you, Fariba, and thank you, Anna. And
I'm sorry, I got bumped off, Melanie. I just wanted to say, and then I apologize for interrupting you, but you did mention that today was UN Day, and I think it was interesting to ask you to comment a bit on James's comments about both the power of the UN and the limitations of the UN. So excuse me for interrupting.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's like, I think this is the challenge of humanity as we amass power, and then to find, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And with a world with so many different perspectives, whether there's even buy-in to the United Nations, like in the United States, for example, is a challenge. But we're at a time where there's such a diversity of governmental systems that I think it's going to be a long time until the United Nations is represented by democracies or countries, like you said, that, within their own context have representation from their own societies. It doesn't represent humanity, and there's a lot happening behind closed doors. So I think
we need more organizations like yours and ours and many, many more. So
yeah, I think our role, Empowerment Works, is really to be just more of the innovating and think tanking. And then it's really also myself as an innovator, like I realize I'm a dynamo kind of inventor, and it needs those other groups that have more scale to say, like, how can we even have their community voices in here? How do we create something new? But just, about the UN, there just needs to be total transparency. Like so many things. I mean, it's really behind. It's the bigger something is, the harder it is for it to evolve, which is kind of why we want to stay small, and so that we can bring new ideas and stay flexible. But there needs to be other groups that come together and model what's possible. And that's really what my dream and hope is, that the Global Summit can, and that's what its designed original founding purpose was, not to become the next thing, but to road test a new globally inclusive, transparent model for sociocracy, so that we can learn from it, evaluate it, measure it, and then have a very vetted, transparent, clear recommendation that people can look at objectively and say, great, now we can apply these things. So we're not just shooting in the dark for the United Nations.
On behalf of Fielding and Wing and everybody in attendance today, I really want to thank you so much for your presentation today. I wish you well. We can see why your title is Executive Director and Chief Innovator at Empowerment Works. So continue to be in touch, and thank you everyone for your attendance today, and we'll see you in the spring with another series of Wednesday webinars with Wing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye.